If you make love every day, you won't go hungry, the millionaire whispered to the plump woman. If you enjoy stories of love, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing. Helen Albright opened her eyes to another relentless dawn on the Texas plains. The sun hadn't even fully risen on the horizon, but the heat was already hinting at a promise of torment. Harmony Ranch, once the family's pride, was now just the ghost of a prosperity that had vanished like water in dry earth. 7 years of drought had transformed the verdant pastures into a sad, yellowish carpet. The cattle, once numerous, were reduced to half a dozen scrawny, desperate beasts, as hungry as the land's owner herself. Helen dragged herself out of bed, her body aching. At 32, she felt as though she carried the weight of a much longer life. Her brown hair, once shiny, was now cut short at her shoulders for practicality. Her hands, calloused from hard work, trembled slightly as she lit the wood-burning stove to prepare thin coffee, the last of her reserves. Standing by the kitchen window, she observed the vastness of the land she had inherited from her father. The barn, once full of grain and hay, was practically empty. The fences were falling apart, and the paint on the main house peeled like old skin. Every day she wondered how much longer she could endure before everything collapsed. The only thing that kept her steady was the memory of her father saying, "This land has a heart of gold, daughter. Even when it seems dead, it's just waiting to bloom again." But now, the ranch's golden heart seemed to have stopped beating for good. Debts piled up in a stack of papers on the living room table. Heartland Bank threatened to foreclose on the mortgage. The hands, one by one, had left in search of work on other ranches. Only Grandma Josephine remained, the cook who had been with the family since before Helen was born, and who refused to abandon ship, even without receiving a salary for months. "Child, you need to accept Mr. Gregory's offer. He's a powerful man. He'll save the ranch," Grandma Josephine always said, referring to the neighboring rancher, the largest landowner in the region, Gregory Monroe and his hawkish eyes. Helen shuddered just thinking about him. At 55, a widower with no children, the man had expanded his lands by swallowing up, one by one, neighboring properties that succumbed to the crisis. His methods were well known: loans at exorbitant interest rates, constant pressure, and finally, the ultimate proposal, usually directed at widows or single heiresses like Helen. "The offer still stands," he had said on his last visit 2 weeks ago. "You marry me, keep the ranch's name, and I'll pay all the debts. Harmony Ranch joins my lands, and everyone wins." Helen had refused, as she had done other times. But now, with the foreclosure notice in her hands, Gregory's proposal began to seem like the only possible path. Marriage. The word tasted bitter in her mind. This wasn't how she had imagined her life. Not after Frederick. The name she avoided even in thought arose like a reopened wound. Frederick Menzies, the man who had left 5 years ago without looking back. The man who had left her pregnant and alone, only for her to lose the baby 3 months later amidst the pain of abandonment. The child who would have been the continuation of the Albright line on the ranch. The child who never got to know his own father. Helen shook her head, shooing away the memories like flies. There was no time for ghosts of the past. She had a ranch to maintain, even if only for a few more days. She tucked her flannel shirt into her worn jeans, tied her boots, and went out for her daily work. The sun was already scorching when she finished feeding the few chickens that still laid eggs sporadically. The pregnant cow, her last hope for a new beginning, licked salt from her palm with its rough tongue. "Hold on, Star," she whispered, caressing the animal's muzzle. "This calf will be our miracle." That's when she heard the sound of hooves in the distance. A lone rider approached along the dirt road that cut across the property. Helen shielded her eyes from the sun with a cupped hand, trying to identify the visitor. It wasn't Gregory, whose corpulent figure was unmistakable even from a distance. This man was thinner, more agile on the horse. As the figure drew closer, Helen's heart pounded in her chest like a cornered animal. That way of riding, that posture, it couldn't be. 5 years had passed, but her body recognized Frederick even before her mind accepted the reality. He dismounted a few yards from the house, tying his horse to a post. He was thinner than Helen remembered, his face weathered by the sun and marked by lines that hadn't been there before. His unshaven beard and longer hair gave him a wild look. His eyes, however, remained the same, that deep blue that always made her think of the sky after a storm. "Helen," he said simply, as if 5 years hadn't passed, as if there were no abyss between them. She felt the blood drain from her face, only to return in a wave of heat. Anger, hurt, a whirlwind of emotions that left her momentarily speechless. "What are you doing here?" she finally managed to say, her voice coming out frailer than she would have liked. "I came back," Frederick replied, taking a step towards her. "I needed to come back." Helen instinctively recoiled. Needed to? After 5 years? After everything that happened? The words came out like stones, hard and sharp. "I know I have no right to just show up like this," he said, stopping where he was. His eyes scanned the ranch, noting its dilapidated state. "But when I heard about the situation—" "Who told you?" Helen interrupted him, crossing her arms defensively. "I met George Daniels in Dallas. He mentioned Harmony Ranch was on the verge of bankruptcy." Frederick ran a hand through his hair in a gesture she knew well, a sign of nervousness he had never been able to control. "He said Gregory Monroe was about to take over everything." Gregory's name between them seemed to materialize an invisible presence. Helen looked away, unable to meet those blue eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. "The ranch is my responsibility now. My father died 2 years ago," she said, her voice firmer. "And unlike you, I don't abandon what's mine." Pain crossed Frederick's face like lightning. "I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man." "Don't talk about him. You lost that right when you left without looking back." A heavy silence fell between them. In the distance, a hawk cut through the sky with its sharp cry, as if punctuating the moment. "Helen, I know I deserve nothing from you," Frederick finally said. "But I came to help. I have knowledge. I have resources now. I can save the ranch." She laughed, a bitter sound that held no joy. "Save? You? The same person who abandoned it when it needed you most?" His face hardened for an instant, then softened into something close to defeat. "I deserved that. I deserved every word. But I'm not here for myself. I'm here for Harmony Ranch." "Harmony Ranch doesn't need you," Helen lied, knowing the ranch was on the verge of collapse. "Yes, it does, and you know it." He looked around again, as if calculating the damage. "Let me stay. I'll work. I ask for nothing in return." Helen felt a tightening in her chest. Part of her wanted to scream at him to leave, to go back to the hole he crawled out of. But another part, a part she hated at that moment, recognized that she needed help. Any help. "You can stay in the barn," she finally said grudgingly. "But it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you're forgiven or that I trust you. It just means we need hands to work." The relief on his face was almost palpable. "Thank you. It's more than I deserve." "Yes, it's more than you deserve," she retorted, turning her back on him and walking towards the house. Grandma Josephine watched them from the porch, her eyes wide with surprise as she recognized Frederick. Helen passed her without a word, entering the house like a whirlwind. "My goodness," the old cook murmured, making the sign of the cross. "The dead are returning." Frederick picked up his worn backpack and a canvas sack tied to his horse's saddle. "Good afternoon, Grandma Josephine. You haven't changed a bit." "But you have, young man. You look like you've seen the devil up close." He smiled without joy. "Perhaps I have. She suffered a lot, you know, when you left, and then with the baby." Frederick's expression changed instantly. "What baby?" Grandma Josephine covered her mouth with her hand, realizing too late what she had said. "You'd better ask her," she murmured, before retreating to the kitchen. Frederick stood in the yard, the weight of that revelation bending his shoulders like an invisible burden. A baby, his baby, and he knew nothing about it. In the barn, he arranged his few possessions in a corner on the fresh straw. The wooden walls had cracks where the sun entered in golden beams, illuminating the dust suspended in the air. This place that had once been the symbol of the ranch's prosperity was now practically empty. Only a few rusty tools and piles of dried hay remained. Frederick opened the canvas sack and took out a harmonica. The instrument, old and scratched, had been his companion on long, solitary nights in the mountains. He brought it to his lips and blew a sad melody, letting the notes get lost among the cracks in the wood. From the house window, Helen heard the music and felt her eyes sting. That same harmonica Frederick used to play on starry nights, when they spread a blanket in the yard and dreamed of the future. A future that never came to be. "Why did he come back now?" she asked Grandma Josephine, who was preparing a thin broth for dinner. "Perhaps the angels sent him," the old woman replied, stirring the pot. "The ranch needs a man. I took care of it alone for 5 years. And you did your best, child. But look around. We're one step away from losing everything." Grandma Josephine put the wooden spoon on the stove and held Helen's hands in hers, rough and marked by time. "I know he hurt you, but sometimes God works in mysterious ways." Helen pulled her hands away from the old woman and stepped back, unable to deal with this new confusion in her mind. 5 years of building walls around her heart, and all it took was seeing him again for all the foundations to shake. The next day, Frederick started working even before the sun rose. Helen found him fixing the corral fence, the muscles in his back rippling under his sweat-soaked shirt. He had found tools in the shed and had already replaced several rotten posts. "You don't have to do this," she said, stopping a few feet away. He turned, wiping his forehead with his forearm. "Yes, I do. This fence won't last another rainy season." "If we even get a rainy season," she replied, looking up at the relentlessly blue sky. Frederick dropped the hammer and approached her, still maintaining a respectful distance. "Helen, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the baby." She froze, her face visibly paling. "Grandma Josephine and her big mouth," she murmured. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what? That I was pregnant with a man who disappeared without a trace? That I lost the baby at 4 months because my body couldn't handle the stress and pain of abandonment?" The words came out like splinters, sharpened by long-held resentment. Frederick closed his eyes, as if each word were a physical blow. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. You weren't here. If I had known..." "If you had known what? Would you have come back? Would you have stayed?" Helen laughed bitterly. "Don't lie to yourself, Frederick. You chose to leave." "I chose to because I had to go," he said, his voice low but firm. "After your father threw me out." "My father didn't throw you out," she interrupted him. "He just asked for time. Time for you to prove you were more than a penniless veterinarian, that you could take care of me and the ranch, but you didn't want to wait. You chose your pride instead of us." Frederick swallowed hard, unable to deny the truth in her words. "I was young and stupid, and I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of not being enough, of failing you and your father, of seeing in his eyes the confirmation of what my own father always said, that I would never amount to anything." Helen felt a knot form in her throat. She knew well the story of Frederick's difficult childhood, raised by an alcoholic father who constantly beat and humiliated him. "So you decided it was better to just give up? Without a fight? Without giving me a chance to fight by your side?" "I thought I was setting you free," he said, almost in a whisper, "that you deserved someone better." "It wasn't your right to decide that for me," Helen replied, her voice finally breaking. "It never was." A moment of heavy silence settled between them, laden with unspoken words and feelings held back for too long. "I'll leave if you want me to," Frederick finally said. "If my presence causes more pain than help, I'll go today." Helen wanted to say yes. She wanted to send him away, to return to her solitary life where at least the pain was known and manageable. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the desperation of the ranch's situation. Perhaps it was something deeper, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Finish the fence," was all she said before walking away. In the days that followed, a tacit agreement settled between them. Frederick worked from dawn till dusk, repairing fences, renovating the barn roof, feeding and caring for the few remaining animals. Helen followed her routine, keeping her distance, but observing, almost against her will, the gradual transformation of the ranch. 2 weeks after Frederick's arrival, the letter came. An official envelope from Heartland Bank with the notification Helen had dreaded. The mortgage foreclosure was scheduled for the end of the month. She had only 10 days left to pay off the debt, or Harmony Ranch would go to auction. Helen was sitting on the porch steps, the paper trembling in her hands, when Gregory Monroe arrived. His imported Jeep raised a cloud of dust as it stopped in the yard. The rancher got out of the vehicle, adjusting his Panama hat over his graying hair. "Good afternoon, Helen," he greeted, with that false cordiality that always made her uncomfortable. His small, shrewd eyes swept over the property, noticing the recent repairs. "I see you've been making improvements, but I'm afraid it's too late." Helen stood up, instinctively straightening her posture. "What do you want? Gregory?" "I came to make a final offer." He approached, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of dry earth. "I've just acquired your debt from the bank." "What?" The shock made her take a step back. "An interesting investment." Gregory smiled, his teeth too white against his tanned skin. "Now, instead of going to auction, the ranch can be yours, or rather, ours." "I don't understand." "It's simple, my dear. Marry me as I've been proposing for months, and I'll tear up these papers. Harmony Ranch remains yours, or rather ours. Otherwise—" He left the sentence hanging, the meaning too clear to need completion. Helen felt her stomach churn. "And if I get the money? If I pay the debt?" Gregory laughed, a sound like a crow's caw. "And where would you get almost $750,000 in 10 days, Helen? We both know it's impossible." He moved closer, lightly touching her face with cold fingers. "Don't complicate things. You know I can be a good husband. You'll have everything you want." "Except my freedom," she replied, pulling away from his touch. "Freedom?" Gregory spread his arms, indicating the deteriorated ranch. "Is this freedom to you? Living in misery, about to lose everything your father built?" His words hit Helen like a punch. The mention of her father, the veiled threat of losing her family's legacy, these were direct hits at her most vulnerable points. "I'll give you a few more days to think," Gregory said, adjusting his leather gloves. "But don't wait too long. My patience has limits." He turned to leave, but stopped when he saw a figure emerging from the barn. Frederick walked towards him, his expression grim, his body tense like that of a predator about to strike. "Well, well," Gregory murmured, his smile turning into a hard line. "The prodigal son has returned." "Gregory," Frederick greeted dryly. "Frederick Menzies, I thought you had died in some hole." "Sorry to disappoint you." The two men measured each other for a moment, hostility palpable in the air between them. Helen knew the story. Gregory had never hidden his contempt for Frederick, considering him an opportunist interested only in the Albrights' fortune. "You're too late, young man," Gregory finally said. "Harmony Ranch already has an owner." "From what I see, it's still Albright family property," Frederick replied, his eyes fixed on the other man's. "For now." Gregory turned back to Helen, deliberately ignoring Frederick. "Think about my offer, my dear. It's the only way out." With that, he returned to his jeep and left, leaving a cloud of dust and tension behind. "What offer?" Frederick asked as soon as the vehicle disappeared down the road. Helen hesitated for a moment. "It's none of your business." "If it involves the ranch, it's my business too." He took a step towards her, his expression softening. "Helen, let me help." "How?" "Do you have $750,000 hidden in that worn backpack?" Frederick's expression changed subtly, something she couldn't decipher. "Maybe not $750,000, but I have an idea. Trust me, just this once." "Trust you?" Helen felt anger resurface. "The last time I trusted you, I was left alone, pregnant, and abandoned." The blow hit Frederick hard. He lowered his eyes, visibly shaken. "I deserve that. But the ranch doesn't deserve to be swallowed up by someone like Gregory. Your father doesn't deserve that." The mention of her father, for the second time that day, caused emotion to finally break through the carefully constructed barriers. Helen felt tears sting her eyes. "What do you want from me, Frederick? What did you really come here for?" "I came to correct my mistakes," he replied simply. "Or at least try to." The sun began to set, painting the sky red and gold. Shadows lengthened in the ranch yard, like dark fingers pointing to an uncertain future. 3 days, Helen finally said. "You have 3 days to show me this miraculous plan of yours. After that, I'll make my decision about Gregory's proposal." Frederick nodded, relief visible on his face. 3 days is enough. As he walked away towards the barn, Helen remained on the porch, watching the fiery sunset sky. Part of her, perhaps the weakest, perhaps the most sensible, wanted to believe that Frederick really had a plan, that he had truly returned to correct his mistakes, that something good could come out of so much suffering. The other part, however, warned her to prepare for another disappointment, for the inevitable moment when he would leave again, leaving behind only the empty echo of unfulfilled promises. That night, as Grandma Josephine prepared a simple dinner with the few supplies left in the pantry, Helen remained seated at the kitchen table, her head full of conflicting thoughts. From the barn, the melancholic sound of Frederick's harmonica drifted into the night, like a lament for all that could have been and never was. The next morning, Frederick left before dawn. Helen saw him saddling his horse in the first light of daybreak, but pretended to still be asleep. Part of her feared he was leaving again, giving up once he realized the magnitude of the problems they faced. The other part, the one that still held a glimmer of hope, wanted to believe he actually had a plan. Grandma Josephine was making coffee when Helen finally came down to the kitchen, her eyes marked by a restless night's sleep. "He went to town," the old woman informed her, placing a steaming cup in front of Helen. "Said he'd be back before nightfall." Helen nodded without answering, blowing on the hot coffee. What could Frederick be doing in town? Silverton was almost a 3-hour ride away. Whatever his plan, it would have to be extraordinary to solve a debt of that size in so little time. The day dragged on slowly. Helen occupied herself with ranch chores, feeding the animals, checking the fence Frederick had repaired, clearing debris from a small shed that had collapsed in the last storm. Working to exhaustion was her way of keeping her mind off her worries, off memories, off Frederick's disturbing presence in her life again. While cleaning an old toolbox of her father's, she found a time-yellowed photograph. She and Frederick, 5 years younger, smiling in front of the ranch at its peak. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair loose in the wind. He embraced her waist, looking at her with an adoration that was palpable even in the faded photo. It was taken only a few weeks before he left. Helen felt a knot form in her throat. How had they come to this point? How had the love that seemed so solid, so true, turned into rubble and heartache? Perhaps love was never truly solid. Perhaps it was just an illusion that crumbled at the first sign of difficulty. "You never told me what really happened," Grandma Josephine's voice interrupted her thoughts. The old woman stood at the shed entrance, watching Helen with the photo in her hands. "Why he left like that?" Helen put the photograph back in the chest. "What's there to tell? He gave up. He left. End of story." "Your father said something different," Grandma Josephine commented, sitting on a nearby crate. "Shortly before he died, when fever made him delirious, he mentioned Frederick, said he had made a mistake, that the young man was right." Helen stared at the old woman, surprised. "My father never told me about that." "Pride, child. Old Mr. Albright had the same stubborn pride you inherited." Grandma Josephine sighed, smoothing her worn apron. "Your father and Frederick had a big fight that day. Worse than you know." "What day?" "The day he left. Frederick came with an idea to save the ranch from the first big crisis. He wanted to change the way cattle were raised, invest in new techniques he had studied in college. Your father didn't accept. Said no young man fresh out of school was going to teach him, who had been raising cattle for 40 years, how to manage his land." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Her father had never told her the details of that argument. He had only said that Frederick had left after a disagreement. "The words were harsh," Grandma Josephine continued. "Your father accused him of wanting to change everything just to impress, of lacking real experience, of being just a dreamer who would put the ranch at risk. And Frederick, well, he responded in kind, said your father was a stubborn old man who preferred to see everything collapse rather than accept changes, that he was stuck in the past. And then, your father sent him away, said he didn't want a son-in-law who didn't respect his experience and wisdom, to come back when he learned to respect his elders." Grandma Josephine paused, her eyes lost in memories. "Frederick left furious, said he would prove he was right, that he would return one day and show old Mr. Albright that his ideas worked." Helen felt as if the ground opened beneath her feet. "He never told me that. Because he loved you too much to turn you against your father." Grandma Josephine stood up with difficulty. "I'm not saying he was right to leave without saying goodbye to you. It was a terrible mistake. But maybe he's not the monster you built in your head all these years." The old cook left Helen alone with her disturbed thoughts. The story she had told herself for 5 years of the man who had abandoned her out of cowardice, or because he didn't love her enough, began to unravel before a much more complex and painful truth. The sun was already setting when Helen heard the sound of approaching hooves. She ran to the porch, her heart pounding for a reason she didn't want to admit to herself. Frederick returned, mounted on his horse, leading a mare that carried several sacks. "What is all this?" she asked when he dismounted in the yard. "Seeds," Frederick replied, beginning to unload the sacks. "Corn, beans, squash, fast-growing crops that can be planted now and harvested in a few months." "Seeds?" Helen stared at him, confused. "How will that solve our immediate situation?" "It won't, but it's the first step." Frederick carried the sacks to the shed. "Tomorrow morning we'll prepare the land. The greenhouse I set up on the north side of the ranch is intact. We can start there." "Frederick," Helen followed him, her impatience growing. "We have 10 days until Gregory takes the ranch. There's no time to plant anything." He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense in the twilight. Trust me. The seeds are just one part of the plan. And what's the other part? Why all the mystery? Frederick hesitated as if pondering how much he should reveal. I need to go to Dallas tomorrow. There's someone I need to meet. Who? An old friend. Someone who can help us with the money. Helen crossed her arms, skeptical. A friend who will lend us $750,000 just like that? Willingly? It's not exactly a loan. Frederick ran a hand through his hair in his characteristic gesture of nervousness. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me. I can't yet. I need to be sure first. He approached, stopping just a step away. I know asking for your trust is asking too much after everything that happened, but that's what I'm asking for, Helen. Just one more day. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to demand full explanations, total transparency. But something in his eyes, a mix of determination and vulnerability, made her yield. One day, she agreed. But tomorrow night I want to know exactly what you're planning. Frederick nodded, relief visible on his face. You'll know everything. I promise. That night, after a silent dinner prepared by Grandma Josephine, Helen lay awake in her room, tossing and turning in bed as she tried to organize her thoughts. The revelation about the fight between her father and Frederick had shaken the foundations of the narrative she had built over the years. If he had left not out of cowardice, but out of wounded pride, believing he was right and wanting to prove his worth, did that change everything? Or was it just a convenient excuse to justify the abandonment? And then there was the matter of the baby. The child he had never known existed. The child she had lost amidst the despair of loneliness. That loss was still an open wound in her heart, an emptiness that nothing seemed to fill. Outside, the sound of Frederick's harmonica drifted into the night, the same melody as always, the one he had composed for her in the early days of their courtship. Helen found herself unconsciously following the rhythm, the notes evoking memories she had tried to bury for so long. Dawn came too quickly. Helen went down to the kitchen and found Frederick already ready to leave, wearing the only clean shirt he owned. I'll be back tonight, he said, adjusting his hat. Try to prepare the greenhouse plot if you can. The soil needs to be plowed before we plant. Helen nodded, watching him mount his horse and ride off towards the highway, where he would likely catch a bus to Dallas. The big city was almost 5 hours away, which meant he would spend most of the day traveling. What kind of plan required such urgent travel? Following Frederick's instructions, Helen spent the morning cleaning the old greenhouse. The metal and glass structure had been built by her father in prosperous times, but in recent years it had been abandoned due to lack of resources to keep it running. Frederick had spent the last few days repairing the broken windows and the irrigation system. As she worked, Helen couldn't help but notice the care and precision with which Frederick had made the repairs. He had always had skillful hands, a natural talent for fixing broken things. It was ironic, she thought, how someone so good at repairing the tangible could have caused so much damage to the intangible, to hearts, to dreams, to trust. The sun was already high when Gregory Monroe appeared again. This time, he didn't come alone. 2 burly men accompanied him in the Jeep, thugs known in the region for doing the rancher's dirty work. "Good morning, Helen," Gregory greeted, his tone falsely cordial. "I came to see if you've considered my proposal." Helen dropped the hoe she was working with and stood up, facing him with her chin raised. "I still have a week to decide, Gregory." "Actually," he smiled, pulling an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket, "there's been a change of plans. The deadline has been moved up." "What?" Helen snatched the envelope from his hands and opened the official document. It was a notice of immediate mortgage foreclosure. "This isn't legal. We had an agreement." "Agreements change when circumstances change." Gregory looked around, his eyes lingering on the newly repaired greenhouse. "I see your veterinarian friend is making improvements. It seems you have plans for Harmony Ranch." "The ranch is still mine," Helen replied, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "You can't just unilaterally change the terms." "Yes, I can, my dear. It's the privilege of those who hold power." He gestured to the two men accompanying him. "Silas and Tony came to take an inventory of the property, standard procedure before possession is taken." Helen felt her blood boil. "They are not coming into my house." "It's no longer your house, Helen. It's my property now." Gregory approached, his strong cologne invading her nostrils. "Unless, of course, you accept my proposal. The justice of the peace can marry us today." Helen took a step back, disgusted. "I'd rather see the ranch burn than marry you, Gregory." The smile left the rancher's face, replaced by a hard expression. "Be careful what you wish for, Helen. It might come true." He made another gesture to his thugs. "Do the inventory. I want everything documented." The two men advanced towards the main house. Helen stood in their way, her heart pounding. "You are not coming in. This is still my property by law." The taller of the two, Silas, smiled unpleasantly. "Get out of the way, lady. We don't want to hurt you." "But we will if we have to," Tony added, cracking his knuckles. At that moment, Grandma Josephine appeared on the porch, an old shotgun in her trembling hands. "The first one who takes another step gets buckshot," the old woman yelled, her voice surprisingly firm. The thugs hesitated, looking at Gregory for instruction. The rancher narrowed his eyes, assessing the situation. "Don't be foolish, Josephine," he said calmly. "That shotgun probably hasn't been fired in years, and even if it works, do you think you could hit anyone with those trembling hands?" "I don't need to hit," the old woman replied. "Just the sound of the shot will alert the entire neighborhood, and then, how would you explain being here with your thugs intimidating a lone woman?" A tense silence settled in the yard. Helen saw anger grow in Gregory's eyes, a man accustomed to always getting what he wanted through intimidation. "Very well," he finally said, adjusting his hat. "We'll do it your way, for now." He turned to Helen, his face a mask of false cordiality. "You have until tomorrow at noon. Either you accept my marriage proposal, or Harmony Ranch will be mine, and you and this meddling old woman will be evicted." With that, he gestured to his thugs, and the three returned to the jeep. Before leaving, Gregory rolled down the window and cast a final look at Helen. "Oh, and tell your veterinarian friend he should have stayed in the mountains. Men like him tend to have accidents when they meddle where they're not called." The veiled threat chilled Helen's blood. Even after the jeep disappeared down the road, raising a cloud of dust, she remained motionless in the yard, the crumpled document in her hands. "That man is the devil himself," Grandma Josephine murmured, descending the porch steps with the shotgun still in her hands. "My late husband always said old Mr. Monroe was bad. But the son is worse." Helen swallowed the knot that had formed in her throat. "Grandma Josephine, can you get to town? I need you to send a message to Frederick." "Yes, I can. Sebastian's son passes by here with the milk delivery truck shortly. He'll take me." Helen ran into the house and quickly wrote a note, explaining the new situation. They needed a miracle, and they needed it by noon the next day. The hours dragged on with the slowness of agony. Helen continued working in the greenhouse, more to keep her mind occupied than to truly believe that the seeds would have time to be planted. When the sun began to set, painting the sky blood red, there was no sign of Frederick or Grandma Josephine. Helen made strong coffee and sat on the porch, her eyes fixed on the road. Night fell, and with it came an oppressive silence. Never had the ranch seemed so empty, so vulnerable. She thought of her father's years of work, of the sweat of generations of Albrights poured into that land. She thought of the child who was never born, who would never know the family's legacy. And she thought, against her will, of Frederick, of his determined blue eyes, of his calloused hands working tirelessly to repair what could be repaired. It was almost midnight when she heard the sound of an engine approaching. It wasn't the characteristic rumble of Gregory's Jeep, but something lighter, faster. A headlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the dirt road. A motorcycle. Frederick braked sharply in the yard, raising dust. He dismounted the motorcycle with agility, removing his helmet. His eyes met Helen's on the porch, and he ran to her. "I got your note," he said, breathless. "Is Grandma Josephine all right?" "Yes, she stayed at her sister's house in town. Thought it was safer." Helen stood up, noticing his expression. "What happened? You look different." Frederick took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair, now disheveled by the helmet. "We have the money." Helen felt her heart skip a beat. "How?" Instead of answering, Frederick pulled a thick envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. Helen opened it with trembling fingers, finding inside an amount of money she had never seen together in her entire life. "Frederick, is this real?" "Every note." He smiled, a tired but triumphant smile. $750,000. Enough to pay off the debt and still have some left to start over. Helen looked from the money to his face, incredulous. "Where did this come from? You didn't do anything illegal, did you?" His expression tightened slightly. "Do you really think I would be capable of that?" "I don't know what you're capable of anymore, Frederick. Not after everything." He nodded, accepting the criticism. "It's honest money. My money." "Yours? How?" Frederick took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Remember I told you I went to the mountains, to the Sierra Nevada foothills? I went to work as a veterinarian on isolated ranches in the region. I earned little, but I had nowhere to spend it." He paused. "One day, while treating a horse on a remote property, the animal got spooked and knocked down part of an old stable wall. That's when I saw it." "Saw what?" "Gold. A vein of gold embedded in the rock. The rancher had no idea what he had on his land." Helen felt her breath catch. You told him?" "Of course I did." Frederick seemed slightly offended. "I'm many things, Helen, but I'm not dishonest. I told old Jeremiah, showed him what I had found. He laughed and said he knew there was gold in those mountains, but he was too old to care. Said if I wanted to extract the gold, we could split the profits." "And that's what you did? You became a gold miner?" Frederick nodded. "For the past 4 years, I've extracted enough gold to accumulate a small fortune. I saved every penny, investing only in the necessary equipment. Jeremiah got his share, as we agreed. The rest—" He gestured to the envelope. "I was saving for a purpose." "What purpose?" "For this. To save Harmony Ranch." He took a step towards her. "Helen, when I heard the ranch was in danger, I knew it was time to come back, to use what I had gained to correct my mistakes." Helen looked at the money in the envelope again, feeling a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Relief, confusion, gratitude, and something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. "Why, Frederick? Why did you really come back? Why do you care so much about the ranch?" "It's not for the ranch," he said, his voice low. "It's for you. It always was for you." The silence between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, with feelings repressed for so long. "You left," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper, "without explanation, without goodbye. I was young and stupid, too proud to admit your father might be right, too hurt to stay and face the situation." Frederick took another step, further closing the distance between them. "But not a day passed that I didn't think of you, of us." There was no us for you to think of, Helen replied, feeling tears threaten to surface. You destroyed that when you left. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to mend that mistake, if you give me the chance. He hesitated, then reached out to touch her face. But even if you never forgive me, even if you never accept me back into your life, I still want you to have the ranch, to have your inheritance, your legacy. Helen felt his touch on her skin like an electric current. 5 years of distance, of hurt, of loneliness. And yet, her body recognized that touch, responded to it as if time had not passed. And if I accept the money, what do you want in return? Nothing, he replied immediately. It's yours, no conditions, no obligations. You would give almost $750,000 without asking for anything in return? Helen shook her head, incredulous. Nobody does that. I do. Frederick dropped his hand, stepping back. Because it's the right thing to do, because... He hesitated, his eyes briefly lowering. Because I love you. I never stopped loving you. The words hit Helen like lightning in a clear sky. Love. A word she hadn't heard in so long that seemed to belong to another life, another person. Love isn't abandonment, Frederick. No, it's not. And I'll spend the rest of my days regretting that. He looked at her, his blue eyes shining intensely even in the dim light of the porch. But love is also returning. It's admitting mistakes. It's giving without expecting to receive. Helen looked at the envelope in her hands, at the solution to her most immediate problems, at the chance to keep the ranch in the family. It was an unimaginable gift, fallen from the sky at the last possible moment. And yet, there was an emotional price to pay. The price of accepting that the man who had hurt her so deeply now presented himself as her savior. The price of opening a door she had fought so hard to keep closed. I need to think, she finally said, pressing the envelope against her chest. All of this is too much. Frederick nodded, respecting her space. Tomorrow morning we'll go to the bank. We'll pay the debt and retrieve the mortgage documents. Then you decide what you want to do. If you want me to leave, I will. Without questioning. He turned to leave, but Helen stopped him with a hand on his arm. Where will you sleep? In the barn, as always. No. She took a deep breath, making a decision that seemed both crazy and inevitable. In the house. In the guest room. It's too cold for the barn tonight. A flicker of surprise, and perhaps hope, passed through Frederick's eyes. Are you sure? No, Helen replied honestly. I'm not sure of anything anymore, but it's the least I can offer after what you did today. As she prepared the guest room, a small room that had rarely been used since her father's death, Helen tried to organize her thoughts. The sudden, unexpected turn of events was so abrupt that she could barely process what she felt. Gratitude, confusion, resentment, and something more dangerous, something she tried to ignore, a remnant of the love that had never completely died, only slumbered under layers of pain and abandonment. That night, lying in her bed, Helen heard Frederick's movements in the next room. The old wooden floorboards creaked under his steps, and for a moment she allowed herself to remember other nights, other sounds, of shared laughter, of plans for the future, of promises whispered in the dark, of a time when life seemed full of possibilities before everything fell apart. Sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, it brought confused dreams of golden earth and lost children, of houses collapsing and being rebuilt, of wild horses galloping free under an infinite sky. Dawn brought an unexpected clarity. Helen awoke knowing exactly what she needed to do. She put on her best clothes, a gray skirt and a simple white blouse she saved for special occasions, and went down to the kitchen. Frederick was already there, making coffee. "Good morning," he said, looking nervous. "I hope you don't mind. Grandma Josephine isn't here, so—" "It's fine," she replied, accepting the cup he offered. "Thank you." They drank coffee in a silence laden with unspoken expectations. When they finished, Helen stood up, grabbing her purse. "Let's go," she said simply. "To the bank." The bank branch in Silverton was quiet that Monday morning. The manager, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, received them in his office with visible surprise. "Miss Albright, I didn't expect to see you today. The mortgage foreclosure was already sold to Gregory Monroe." "I know," Helen interrupted him, placing the envelope on the table. "I'm here to pay off the debt, in full." The manager looked at the envelope, then at Helen, then at Frederick, clearly confused. "Well, this is unexpected. Mr. Monroe implied the situation was already resolved." "He was mistaken," Helen replied firmly. "The ranch is mine, and it will remain so." It took 2 hours to complete all the paperwork. The manager personally called the central bank to verify the transfer of mortgage ownership, confirming that the full payment of the debt nullified any prior agreements. When they finally left the agency, Helen carried an official document attesting that Harmony Ranch was free of any liens or debts. "We did it," Frederick said as they got on the motorcycle they had rented in town. "The ranch is saved." Helen nodded, but her expression remained serious. "For now? But Gregory won't accept this easily." "It doesn't matter what he accepts. Legally, he can't do anything." "Gregory doesn't care much for legalities when they don't favor him," Helen replied, remembering the veiled threat he had made. "We need to be prepared." On the way back to the ranch, they stopped briefly at Grandma Josephine's sister's house to pick her up. The old woman cried with joy upon learning that the debt had been paid, hugging Helen and Frederick as if they were her own children. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, wiping tears with her lace handkerchief. "I knew God wouldn't let Harmony Ranch fall into that evil man's hands." The rest of the trip was permeated by a mood of cautious celebration. There was much to do. The ranch needed extensive repairs, new investments, a lot of work to prosper again. But the first and most important step had been taken. The property would remain in the Albright family. When they finally arrived at the ranch entrance, however, the celebratory mood was abruptly interrupted. A column of black smoke rose in the distance, coming from the direction of the main house. "My God!" Grandma Josephine exclaimed, clutching the motorcycle seat. "It's fire!" Frederick accelerated, covering the last stretch of dirt road at maximum speed. When they reached the yard, the scene was one of devastation. The barn was ablaze with high flames, the fire rapidly consuming the old wooden structure. 2 men, the same thugs who had accompanied Gregory the day before, stood in front of the main house with cans of fuel. "Stop!" Helen screamed, jumping off the motorcycle before Frederick could even brake completely. The men turned, surprised. One of them, Tony, had already poured fuel on the porch of the house, preparing to set it on fire. "What do you think you're doing?" Helen advanced, her voice trembling with anger. "Boss's orders," Silas replied with a cruel smile. "If he can't have the ranch, no one else will." Frederick stepped forward, placing himself between Helen and the men. "Get out of here now. The property was legally paid off this morning. You're committing a crime." Tony laughed, pulling a knife from his waistband. "The only crime here is you being alive. The boss was very clear about that." What happened next was too fast for Helen to fully process. Tony lunged at Frederick with the knife. There was a sudden movement, a sound of impact, and then the thug was on the ground, disarmed, with Frederick holding his arm at an impossible angle. "Last chance," Frederick said, his voice calm, but imbued with an authority Helen had never witnessed before. "Leave, and no one else gets hurt." Silas, seeing his companion defeated, hesitated for only a second before running to the jeep parked nearby. Tony, groaning in pain, was released by Frederick and staggered to the vehicle. The two sped off, raising a cloud of dust. "The barn!" Grandma Josephine cried, reminding them of the fire that continued to spread. It took the combined effort of the three to prevent the fire from spreading to the other structures. Using buckets, hoses, and wet blankets, they managed to contain the flames to the barn, which was unfortunately already doomed. When the fire finally died down, to smoldering embers, the three collapsed exhausted in the yard, covered in soot and sweat. "How did you do that?" Helen finally asked, looking at Frederick with a new perspective. "With the thug. I learned a few things in the mountains," he replied simply. "Life there isn't easy. A man needs to know how to defend himself." Helen nodded, a new respect dawning in her eyes. The Frederick who had returned was not the same one who had left 5 years ago. There was a toughness in him now, a determination that hadn't existed before, like steel that had been tempered in fire. "They'll be back," Grandma Josephine said, looking anxiously down the road. "With more men. With Gregory." "Yes," Frederick agreed, getting up and offering his hand to help Helen. "That's why we need to prepare." As they walked towards the house to clean up the mess, Helen realized that something fundamental had changed within her. The anger she had carried for so long, the resentment she had fed like a slow fire, began to give way to something different. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But perhaps it was the beginning of a path to healing. Frederick Menzies was no longer the enemy, the traitor who had abandoned her. He was an ally in the fight to save what was left of her world. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could be something more in the future. As she watched the sun begin to set over Harmony Ranch, over the rebuilt fences, the repaired greenhouse, the promise of new crops, Helen allowed herself, for the first time in years, to contemplate the possibility of a new beginning. Not just for the ranch, but for herself, for her heart. The road would be long and difficult. There would be more battles ahead. Gregory Monroe was not a man to accept defeat easily, and within herself, Helen still carried wounds that would need time to heal completely. But at that moment, as the last flames of the barn died out on the horizon, a certainty formed in her heart. The Albright's golden land, the land her father had loved so much, the land where she was born and raised, the land she had almost lost, would continue to live. And perhaps, along with it, Helen's capacity to believe in love again would also be reborn. The days that followed the barn fire were filled with intense activity at Harmony Ranch. Frederick had insisted on filing a police report against Gregory Monroe, but Helen knew it would be useless. The rancher had too much influence in the region, and his word would carry more weight than theirs, even with Grandma Josephine's testimony. "That's not how we'll win this battle," she explained as they worked side by side planting in the greenhouse. "Gregory doesn't play by the rules." "Then how do we face him?" Frederick asked, his skilled hands placing tomato seeds in the freshly prepared soil. Helen paused for a moment, thoughtful. "By proving he's not as powerful as he thinks. By showing that Harmony Ranch can prosper without him. That we can prosper." Plans began to take shape in the following days. With part of the money left over after paying off the debt, they bought new farm equipment, ordered materials to rebuild the barn, and acquired a few more head of cattle to reinforce the small remaining herd. Frederick suggested a more diversified approach for the ranch, not just cattle as was traditional, but also organic farming, beekeeping, and even a small production of artisan dairy products. "Your father was right about many things," he admitted one evening as they discussed plans on the porch. "But the world has changed. Ranches that rely solely on one source of income are increasingly vulnerable. We need to adapt." Helen observed the man in front of her with a mixture of fascination and caution. This Frederick was different from the impulsive, theoretical young man she had known years ago. There was a maturity in him now, a practical wisdom that came from experience, not just from books. "My father eventually realized that too," she finally said. "In the last few months before he died, he talked about diversifying, about trying new things, but he was already too sick to implement the changes, and I was just trying to keep everything running." A comfortable silence fell between them. Slowly, day by day, something was being rebuilt. And it wasn't just the barn or the fences. A week after the fire, normalcy seemed to be returning. There was no more sign of Gregory or his men, and Helen began to think that perhaps he had decided to leave them alone. That's when Joachim Saunders, a small, neighboring rancher, appeared at Harmony Ranch with disturbing news. "He's buying up all the surrounding lands," Joachim said, accepting the coffee Grandma Josephine offered him. He was a 60-year-old man, thin and weathered by the sun, with gnarled hands of someone who had spent his entire life working the land. "He offers low prices, and when we refuse, the accidents start. Fences cut, cattle poisoned, wells contaminated." "Gregory?" Helen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Who else would it be? The man became obsessed after you defied him. He's determined to isolate Harmony Ranch, to turn it into an island in the middle of his lands." Frederick and Helen exchanged worried glances. Gregory's strategy was clear and effective. Without allied neighbors, without access routes, the ranch would be completely at his mercy. "Joachim, how much did he offer for your property?" Frederick asked, an idea forming in his mind. "A tenth of the real value, an insult, but with the well poisoned and half my cattle dead?" The old rancher sighed, defeat evident in his tired eyes. "I have no choice. I have to sell. What if there was another option?" Frederick looked at Helen as if asking for permission. She nodded, instantly understanding what he was thinking. "We could buy your land, Joachim, for a fair price." The old rancher blinked, surprised. "You? But you just paid off a huge debt. Where would the money come from?" "We still have resources," Frederick replied, "and more importantly, we have a plan that can work better if we join forces instead of surrendering to Gregory one by one." That same afternoon, Frederick and Helen visited 3 other small neighboring properties. In each of them, the story was similar: pressure, intimidation, mysterious accidents. And in each, they made the same proposal: a partnership, a cooperative of small producers united against the common threat. "We're not buying your land," Helen explained. "We're proposing an alliance. Each one keeps their property, but we work together on production, processing, and sales." The idea was simple but revolutionary for the region. With the remaining money from Frederick's gold, they would finance the recovery of properties affected by the accidents. In return, the ranchers would commit to staying on their land and participating in the cooperative model. "Alone, we are vulnerable," Frederick said during a meeting with all the neighbors in Harmony Ranch's rebuilt yard. "United, we can resist. We can even prosper." Of the 5 invited owners, 4 accepted the proposal immediately. The 5th, older and more fearful, needed a few weeks to be convinced. But in the end, the Golden Valley Cooperative was formed, encompassing 6 contiguous properties and creating a block of resistance in the heart of the lands Gregory coveted. It was a silent declaration of war, and Gregory Monroe understood the message perfectly. The response came on a new moon night, when darkness covered movements on the road that cut through the properties. Helen was awakened by frantic barking from the ranch dogs. Frederick was already up, dressing hastily. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up in bed. "I don't know, but the dogs never bark like this without reason." Helen dressed quickly and followed him outside. The night was strangely silent, except for the increasingly desperate barks. That's when they noticed the smell. Smoke. And it wasn't coming from Harmony Ranch's yard, but from the direction of Joachim's property. "He's burning Joachim's ranch!" Helen exclaimed, her heart pounding with dread. Frederick ran to the old pickup truck they had managed to repair in recent weeks. "Wake Grandma Josephine. Call the others. I'm going ahead." As he left, Helen ran to the newly installed phone and started the chain of alerts. One by one, the cooperative members were awakened, mobilized. In less than half an hour, all 6 properties were on high alert. At Joachim's ranch, the situation was serious, but not irrecoverable. The fire had started in the barn, but thanks to the quick arrival of Frederick and 2 other neighbors, they managed to contain it before it reached the main house or the pastures. When Helen arrived, bringing Grandma Josephine and more help, the worst part had already passed. "This won't stop," Joachim said, sitting exhausted in the yard, watching the last fires being fought. "He'll keep going until he breaks us." "No," Frederick replied firmly. "Not if we stick together, not if we refuse to yield." "But how? We can't stay awake every night. We can't watch every inch of our land." Helen knelt before the old rancher, taking his calloused hands in hers. "Joachim, remember what my father always said? Evil only wins when good people give up fighting." "We're not giving up." That same night, as the sun rose, on the horizon, illuminating the damage from the fire, the 6 cooperative owners held an emergency meeting. Difficult decisions were made, strategies outlined. It wouldn't just be passive resistance, it would be a counterattack. The first step was legal. With the combined resources of the cooperative, they hired a lawyer from Dallas, someone without ties to local powers. All incidents were meticulously documented, witnesses interviewed, evidence collected. A formal lawsuit was filed against Gregory Monroe for intimidation, property damage, and attempted illegal monopoly. The second step was economic. The cooperative established direct partnerships with buyers in major centers, eliminating local intermediaries controlled by Gregory. Certified organic products, artisan dairy, pure prairie honey, everything began to be sold directly to restaurants and specialty stores in Dallas, New York City, and Los Angeles. The third step was community-based. The cooperative opened its doors to rural workers in the region, offering fair conditions and profit sharing. People who once depended on Gregory's empire to survive now had a viable alternative. But the most significant response came from where they least expected it. Mary Monroe, Gregory's daughter who had lived away from her father in New York City for years, returned to the region after learning of the conflicts. Against all expectations, she sought out Helen directly. "My father is out of control," Mary said during their meeting on Harmony Ranch's porch. She was a 40-year-old woman with her father's same stout build, but with kind eyes that didn't match the surname she carried. "What he's doing isn't just cruel, it's stupid from a business standpoint. This obsession is ruining everything he's built." "Why did you come to me?" Helen asked, cautiously. Years of conflict with Gregory had made her suspicious of anything related to the Monroe name. "Because you're the only one he truly fears," Mary replied simply. "The only one who managed to defy him and survive. And because—" She hesitated, something vulnerable crossing her usually composed face. "Because I know what it's like to be controlled by him. I know the price you pay for his protection." In the following weeks, Mary became an unexpected but valuable ally. As a 30% shareholder in her father's companies, she had access to privileged information about his plans and movements. More than once, her alerts allowed the cooperative to prepare for Gregory's attacks before they happened. The silent war dragged on for months. There were losses on both sides, more fires, destruction of crops, equipment sabotage. But to Gregory's surprise, with each blow he dealt, the resistance seemed to grow stronger, not weaker. The cooperative expanded, incorporating 3 more neighboring properties. Its reputation grew, attracting the attention of regional and even national media. Small Producers Challenge Rural Empire in Interior of Texas was the headline of a major New York City newspaper. The extensive, well-researched article exposed Gregory's tactics and celebrated the cooperative's innovation and resilience. It was the beginning of the end for Gregory Monroe. The public exposure attracted the attention of authorities who had for years turned a blind eye to his activities. Investigations were opened, tax documents examined, environmental permits verified. The empire he had built on intimidation and political favors began to crumble under external scrutiny. On a rainy November afternoon, almost a year after Frederick's return to Harmony Ranch, Mary Monroe appeared at the ranch with surprising news. "My father is sick," she said, accepting the cup of coffee Grandma Josephine offered her. "A stroke. It's not severe, but enough to scare him. The doctors said he needs to reduce stress, change his life." She paused, swirling the cup between her fingers. "He wants to sell everything, retire, move to the coast." Helen and Frederick exchanged incredulous glances. After so many months of constant conflict, the news seemed too surreal to be true. "Is he really giving up?" Frederick asked, skeptical. "I wouldn't call it giving up. My father would never admit defeat. But yes, he's withdrawing from the game." Mary placed the cup on the table. "And I'm going to take control of the family businesses." "And what does that mean for us, for the cooperative?" Helen questioned, still cautious. Mary's smile was genuine, reaching. Her eyes. "It means peace. It means the first official action under my management will be to establish a formal agreement with the Golden Valley Cooperative. No more conflicts, no more sabotage. On the contrary, I want to propose a partnership." In the days that followed, the details of this improbable partnership began to take shape. The lands Gregory had acquired in the region would be managed under a new model, inspired by the cooperative, but adapted for a larger scale. Mary brought marketing and logistics knowledge acquired during her years of corporate work in New York City. The cooperative contributed expertise in sustainable production and innovative agricultural practices. Together, they were creating something entirely new in the American rural landscape. For Helen, it was as if a nightmare had finally come to an end. After years of constant struggle, first against drought, then against debts, finally against Gregory, a new horizon opened. Harmony Ranch, once on the verge of ruin, was now at the center of a rural revitalization movement that was beginning to attract even international attention. But while the ranch prospered, something else remained in suspense, something between her and Frederick. During that turbulent year, they had developed an efficient partnership, a cautious friendship, perhaps even a renewed mutual respect. But the deeper wounds, the unresolved issues about the past, remained untouched by a tacit agreement. Frederick continued to sleep in the guest room, now permanently his. He worked tirelessly for the ranch and the cooperative, offering ideas, technical knowledge, and manual labor whenever needed. He never charged for his efforts, never asked for formal recognition for his contribution, and never, not once, did he pressure Helen for anything more than the tense camaraderie they had established. It was on a quiet December afternoon, as they checked the progress of the seedlings in the expanded greenhouse together, that Helen finally found the courage to break the silence on the subject they both avoided. "Why did you never ask me?" she said suddenly, interrupting the technical conversation about irrigation systems. Frederick stopped what he was doing, confused. "Ask what?" "About us. About what I feel, what I think." Helen couldn't look directly at him, focusing instead on the lettuce seedlings between her fingers. "You came back saying you love me, that you never stopped loving me. And then, nothing, not a word about it, in an entire year." Frederick remained still for a moment, as if carefully processing his next words. I didn't ask because I feared the answer, he finally said, his voice low, and because I promised myself I wouldn't pressure you, that I would leave the decision in your hands, in your time, even if that meant waiting forever. Helen finally raised her eyes to meet his, that deep blue that had once been her safe harbor, then her greatest pain, and now she no longer knew how to define what it represented. What if I never make that decision? If I never say anything? Then I'll stay exactly where I am now, he replied simply. By your side, helping to care for this land, being your friend, your working partner. That will be enough. Even if you still... She couldn't finish the sentence. Even if I still love you? Frederick completed for her, without hesitation. Yes, because being close to you, even like this, is better than any alternative I can imagine. Helen felt something break inside her, not like a wound opening, but like a dam finally giving way under the pressure of waters held back for so long. Do you think love is like that? That it can survive all of this? Abandonment, loss, a year of war against Gregory? I don't think so, I'm sure. Frederick took a step towards her, careful, like someone approaching a wild animal that might flee at any moment. Helen, love isn't fragile. It's not something that breaks at the first obstacle. True love is like this earth beneath our feet. It can seem dead, it can go through terrible droughts. It can be wounded and mistreated. But if it's real, if its roots are deep enough, it will always find a way to bloom again. His words echoed deeply within Helen, mingling with the memories of what her father always said about the Albright land, that it had a heart of gold, that it was just waiting for the right moment to bloom again. I'm scared, she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. Scared to trust, to believe, to allow myself to feel again, only to be hurt again. Fear is natural, Frederick replied, now so close that she could feel the warmth of his body. But you are the bravest person I know, Helen. You face drought, debts, even Gregory Monroe. Fear has never stopped you before. Helen felt tears sting her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of something more complex, a mixture of fear, hope, and possibilities. You really never knew about the baby? She asked, the question that had remained buried between them for so long finally surfacing. Swear on your life? I swear on everything I am, Frederick replied without hesitation. If I had known, nothing in the world would have stopped me from coming back, from being by your side, from trying to save him. Helen closed her eyes, letting the tears finally fall. Part of her had always doubted, always suspected that somehow he might have known about the pregnancy and still chosen to stay away. Hearing the truth in his voice, seeing the genuine pain in his eyes, was like having an enormous weight lifted from her shoulders. It was a boy, she said softly. The doctors told me later. It was a boy. Frederick said nothing, but Helen saw a single tear roll down his face, marked by the sun and time. A father crying for the son he never knew, for the possibility that never materialized. At that moment, something definitively changed between them, as if the last barrier, the last mistrust, had finally been broken down. Helen took a step forward, closing the distance between them to just a breath. I can't promise it will be easy, she said, her voice firmer now. I can't promise there won't be difficult days, painful memories, moments of doubt. I wouldn't ask for such promises, Frederick replied. Life is never easy, especially a life on the land, depending on the seasons, the rains, luck. I only ask for the chance to be by your side through it all, to build something new, together. Helen didn't answer with words. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips finding Frederick's in a kiss that contained 5 years of absence. A year of cautious rapprochement and a silent promise of many more to come. Spring arrived with an explosion of life at Harmony Ranch. The fields, once parched by the relentless drought, now displayed a vibrant green that seemed impossible just 2 years before. The greenhouse, expanded and modernized, produced an impressive variety of organic vegetables that were a sensation in the Dallas markets. The new barn, sturdier and more spacious than the previous one, housed not only healthy cattle, but also the cooperative's milk processing center. Helen and Frederick's wedding was celebrated under the majestic oak tree in the yard with the participation of all members of the Golden Valley Cooperative. Grandma Josephine, resplendent in her light blue dress, kept repeating that she had always known they would end up together. "The angels told me from the start," she would say, wiping tears of happiness with her lace handkerchief. To everyone's surprise, Mary Monroe attended the ceremony, bringing not only her wishes for happiness, but also the news that her father had finally accepted defeat. Gregory, slowly recovering from his stroke at his beach house, had agreed to sell his lands in the region for a fair price, definitively ending the conflict that had almost destroyed so many lives. During the party, Frederick pulled Helen aside to a quieter corner, away from the music and laughter of the guests. From his pocket, he took out a gold chain with a small pendant, a raw gold nugget in its natural state. "The last nugget I found in the mountains," he explained, placing the chain around her neck. "I kept it as a talisman, a promise that one day I would return to you." Helen touched the small golden nugget, feeling its rough, natural texture against her fingers. It was a perfect symbol for everything they had been through, raw, imperfect, valuable. "Do you know what my father used to say about the land at Harmony Ranch?" she asked, looking into her husband's eyes. "That it had a heart of gold, that even when it seemed dead, it was just waiting for the right moment to bloom again." Frederick smiled, caressing her face. "He was right, about the land, and about us." 3 months after the wedding, on a sunny summer morning, Helen woke up feeling slightly nauseous. In the following days, the symptom persisted, accompanied by an unusual tiredness for someone as energetic as she was. It was Grandma Josephine who first suggested the possibility Helen barely dared to consider. "You're carrying life," the old woman affirmed with the certainty of someone who had seen those signs dozens of times. "I have eyes for these things." The doctor in Silverton confirmed what Helen's heart already knew. A new life was growing inside her, a second chance, a complete new beginning. When she told Frederick, she saw in his eyes a mixture of joy and fear that certainly mirrored her own feelings. The memory of their lost child hovered between them like a ghost. "This time will be different," he promised, embracing her with a mixture of tenderness and fierce protection. "I'll be by your side every moment." And so it was. In the months that followed, Frederick practically never left Helen's side. He insisted she rest more, hired additional help for the ranch, and transformed into a constant, loving shadow. Helen sometimes laughed at his overprotectiveness, but secretly adored this display of care. When the time came for childbirth, a violent storm raged over the region. The roads were impassable, making it impossible to reach the hospital in Silverton. It was Grandma Josephine, with her life experience and gentle hands, who helped bring little Aurora into the world, in the same house where Helen had been born 34 years earlier. "A strong girl," the old woman announced, placing the baby in the exhausted mother's arms. "She has her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. She'll be a handful." Frederick, who hadn't left his wife's side for a minute during labor, looked at his daughter with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "She's perfect," he whispered, delicately touching the tiny fingers that instinctively closed around his thumb. Outside, the storm abated, giving way to a clear sky dotted with stars. The rain, so necessary for the land, had arrived at precisely the right moment, just as Aurora arrived to complete the cycle of renewal that had begun with Frederick's return. On the ranch porch, a few weeks later, Helen cradled her sleeping daughter as she watched the golden sunset over Harmony Ranch's green fields. Frederick approached, bringing her a mug of tea. He sat beside her, one protective arm around her shoulders, the other gently touching their daughter's tiny face. "She is our most precious gold," he murmured. Helen smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. The land has finally bloomed again. And as the sun disappeared on the horizon, bathing the ranch in a golden light that seemed to confirm her father's words, Helen understood the true meaning of the phrase he always repeated. "If you make love every day, you won't go hungry." It wasn't just about working the land with dedication. It was about nurturing the bonds that truly matter. It was about persisting, even when all seems lost. It was about believing in the human heart's capacity to, like the most arid land, bloom again, when watered with patience, forgiveness, and courage. Little Aurora stirred in her arms, briefly opening her blue eyes so similar to her father's, before falling back asleep, safe and loved. And Helen knew, with a certainty that came from the deepest part of her soul, that the story of Harmony Ranch was just beginning its most golden chapter.